Generation Z, those born roughly between 1997 and 2012, represents a fundamental shift in human experience. They're the first generation to have spent their entire adolescence with smartphones in their hands. This is not a small detail, it's the defining characteristic of their upbringing. Unlike millennials who remember a time before the internet was everywhere, Gen Z has no memory of a world without constant connectivity. Their social lives, their entertainment, and even their very sense of self have been filtered through a screen from their earliest formative years. This has shaped them in ways we're only just beginning to understand, creating a group that's more racially and ethnically diverse and on track to be the most well-educated generation yet, but also one profoundly marked by its digital existence. The sheer amount of time this generation spends online is staggering. Many teens are on their devices for upwards of 7 to 9 hours a day, and that doesn't even include schoolwork. This isn't just passive consumption, it's a constant stream of social media updates, videos, messages, and games. This constant digital tether has fundamentally rewired their patterns of social interaction. Face-to-face hangouts with friends have been steadily replaced by group chats and Snapchat streaks. The slow, nuanced process of building in-person relationships has given way to the instant, often superficial connections of the digital world. This isn't just a preference. For many, it's honestly the only way of socializing they've ever known, leading to a decline in the real-world social skills previous generations took for granted. This digital immersion has had a measurable impact on their cognitive and emotional development. The constant barrage of notifications and the endless scroll of social media feeds have been linked to shorter attention spans. When information is always available in bite-sized, algorithmically perfected chunks, the ability to focus on long-form reading or complex single-task activities can atrophy. It's not that they're incapable of deep thought, but rather that their environment actively discourages it. They've been trained by their technology to seek constant novelty and immediate gratification, which can make the slower, more demanding tasks of traditional learning and work feel uniquely challenging and unrewarding. Consequently, the very fabric of their adolescence is different. The rites of passage that once defined the teenage years, getting a driver's license, working a part-time job, or just hanging out at the mall, have become less common for Gen Z. They're less likely to drive, date, or work for pay during their high school years compared to boomers, Gen X, or even millennials at the same age. Their world is often safer from physical risks but far more exposed to the psychological dangers of the online sphere. This extended, screen-based childhood has delayed their transition into traditional adult responsibilities, creating a generation that's in many ways more sheltered yet simultaneously more exposed than any before it. The rise of the smartphone coincides almost perfectly with a troubling and undeniable crisis in teen mental health. Since around 2012, rates of anxiety, depression, and self-harm among adolescents have skyrocketed, particularly for girls. We see this not just in surveys where teens report feelings of sadness and hopelessness, but also in hospital admission data for self-injury. The correlation is just too strong to be ignored. While many factors contribute to mental health, the introduction of a device that provides constant social comparison, cyberbullying, and sleep disruption into the lives of nearly every teen appears to be a primary driver of this epidemic of unhappiness. The pressure to be perfect, to curate a flawless online persona, is a heavy burden for a developing mind to carry. This generation lives under the shadow of constant social surveillance. Every photo, every comment, and every post is subject to judgment in the form of likes, shares, and comments. This creates a relentless performance culture where one's self-worth can feel directly tied to online metrics. The fear of being left out, or FOMO, is no longer a fleeting feeling but a constant state, stoked by feeds showing friends seemingly having more fun and living better lives. This digital stage fosters a deep-seated anxiety and a feeling of inadequacy. It's a comparison trap on an epic scale, where everyone else's highlight reel is pitted against your own behind-the-scenes reality, leading to a pervasive sense of loneliness, even when you are, paradoxically, more connected than ever. The effects of this digital life extend into the night, disrupting the most fundamental pillar of mental well-being: sleep. Many teens sleep with their phones by their beds, and the temptation to check notifications or scroll through feeds late into the night is immense. The blue light emitted from screens suppresses melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep, making it harder to fall asleep and reducing sleep quality. Chronic sleep deprivation is directly linked to increased irritability, difficulty concentrating, and a higher risk of developing mood disorders like depression and anxiety. For a generation already under immense pressure, losing precious hours of restorative sleep night after night only deepens the mental health hole they find themselves in. This public health crisis is not a sign of weakness, but a predictable outcome of their environment. Gen Z is not inherently more fragile, they're simply canaries in the digital coal mine. They're navigating a social landscape that's fundamentally different and, in many ways, more psychologically taxing than the one their parents grew up in. The constant pressure, the social comparison, the sleep disruption, and the decline in real-world interaction have created a perfect storm for mental distress. Acknowledging this reality is the first step toward understanding the profound challenges they face and finding ways to build a healthier environment for them to thrive in. Beyond the psychological pressures of their digital world, Gen Z is stepping into an economic landscape fraught with unprecedented challenges. They're entering adulthood burdened by circumstances largely outside their control. The cost of living has soared, with essentials like housing reaching crisis levels in many cities. The dream of homeownership, once a cornerstone of the American dream, feels like a distant fantasy to many young people watching their paychecks get devoured by exorbitant rent. They're often told to save more and work harder, but this advice rings hollow when the fundamental economic structures are stacked against them in a way they were not for previous generations. Student debt is another heavy anchor weighing this generation down. Encouraged to pursue higher education as the only path to a stable career, many have been forced to take on staggering amounts of debt to do so. They graduate not with a sense of opportunity, but with a financial burden that will follow them for decades, dictating their career choices, delaying major life milestones like marriage or buying a home, and creating a baseline of financial anxiety. This debt-for-diploma trade-off has left many feeling trapped, questioning whether the investment was worth the immense and lasting cost. The promise of upward mobility through education feels broken. The nature of work itself has become less secure. The stable, long-term careers with benefits that their grandparents might have enjoyed are increasingly rare. In their place is the rise of the gig economy, characterized by short-term contracts, freelance assignments, and a lack of traditional employee protections like health insurance, paid time off, or retirement plans. This instability creates a state of perpetual hustle, where individuals must constantly seek out their next project, leading to burnout and a chronic sense of economic insecurity. The idea of a predictable career path has been replaced by a precarious and often exhausting patchwork of jobs. This combination of high debt, high living costs, and precarious work has created a generation defined by economic frustration. They've played by the rules they were given, only to find that the goalposts have been moved. The narrative that hard work guarantees success no longer seems to hold true. This economic reality is not a result of their choices, but a consequence of systemic shifts that occurred long before they entered the workforce. Their cynicism about the economic system is not misplaced. It's a rational response to the difficult hand they've been dealt, shaping their worldview and their demands for systemic change. In response to the world they have inherited, Gen Z has emerged as a generation of passionate activists. Witnessing political polarization, social inequality, and the escalating climate crisis through their screens, they've become anything but apathetic. They're the driving force behind movements like the global climate strikes, demanding urgent action from world leaders with a moral clarity that's honestly hard to dismiss. They use their digital fluency to organize, to disseminate information, and to hold institutions accountable in ways that were previously impossible. Their activism isn't abstract. It's a direct and desperate plea to fix a world they feel is teetering on the brink of collapse. This generation is also profoundly challenging long-standing social norms, particularly around identity, gender, and sexuality. They're far more likely to question traditional labels and embrace a more fluid and inclusive understanding of who they are. This is often misunderstood by older generations who may see it as a confusing or unnecessary complication of simple truths. However, for Gen Z, this is a core part of their identity, a rejection of rigid boxes and an assertion of individual autonomy. They're not just asking for tolerance, they're demanding acceptance and a fundamental rethinking of the social structures that have historically marginalized people. Of course, this approach has drawn significant criticism. Detractors often label Gen Z as snowflakes, overly sensitive, easily offended, and quick to engage in cancel culture. They're accused of shutting down debate and being unwilling to tolerate opposing viewpoints. There's a perception that their focus on emotional safety and trigger warnings has created an intellectually fragile generation, unable to cope with the harsh realities of the world. Critics argue that this hypersensitivity stifles free speech and creates an environment of fear, where one wrong word can lead to public shaming and professional ruin. However, many sociologists and psychologists offer a different perspective. They see these traits not as weakness, but as adaptation. In a world saturated with information and online hostility, developing a strong filter for harmful content and a low tolerance for injustice can be a survival mechanism. What critics call oversensitivity, experts might call a heightened sense of empathy and a refusal to accept the casual bigotry that was once commonplace. The final question, then, is not what is wrong with Gen Z. The more pressing question is whether the problem lies with the generation itself, or with the broken and challenging world they're so desperately trying to navigate and repair.